Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Fuel Poverty Action's series of monthly learning sessions, Fuel for Thought, from fuel poverty to climate justice. Fuel Poverty Action is a group of ordinary people fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off prepayment meters. And we campaign to protect people from fuel poverty. We challenge rip-off energy companies and unfair policies that leave people to endure cold homes. And we take action for warm, well-insulated homes and clean and affordable energy that's under the control of people and communities, not private companies. And this space, Fuel for Thought, is where we like to share research and lived experience, tackle lies, and clear up confusion as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists, and campaigners. And this month, we're doing a bit of a follow-on from June, where we're looking beyond our domestic energy system towards a global view of the movement towards renewable energy. And as I said, we have two speakers from the London Mining Network who are here with us this evening to lead the conversation. First up, we're going to hear from Jake Sims, who is Just Transition Coordinator at London Mining Network, and is going to speak about the need for a just energy transition that minimizes mineral demands and respects the rights of mining affected communities. Thanks so much for being with us, Jake. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Amal. And yeah, we're very privileged to have been invited to speak today. It's like an honour to share the space with you all. Fuel Poverty Action, an organisation that we've always had incredible respect for the amazing work that you're doing. Excited to hear from everyone else as the discussion opens up later. So I guess I wanted to just start by acknowledging that when we talk about the injustices being driven globally by the transition to an energy system powered by renewable energy, there are many stages of the supply chain that we could be talking about. So I think my colleague Diana and I are obviously going to talk particularly about the stage of extraction and mining, which is what we focus on as London Mining Network. We're a network of groups that work in solidarity with communities across the world harmed by British mining companies. Many of the world's biggest mining companies are based in or financed from London. But of course, we could also talk about the processing of the minerals. We could talk about the manufacturing of renewable energy technologies and of renewable generation. And I think it's important to start with that context. Some of you may have come across the work of organisers, Hamza Hamishen and Katie Samwell, who wrote an incredible book called Dismantling Green Colonialism, where they lay out, for example, how in North Africa there's vast generation of wind and solar renewable energy, often driven through an export-oriented lens, where the energy being produced is to meet European energy needs, yet the harms of that generation is obviously felt by the communities who are displaced to make that happen. So, for example, there was a proposal for a 2,500 mile underwater cable linking Morocco and the UK, which, if it had gone through, would have supplied up to 8% of the UK's electricity consumption. And that project would have led to vast land grabbing and displacement of affected communities in Morocco. But I guess, obviously, what we've seen, particularly with the new government, is an increasing push towards energy production and manufacturing in the UK. And we can debate to what extent it's happened, but there's a slight push towards more of an industrial strategy, where there's an attempt to transition the UK's manufacturing base towards producing green energy technologies, which I'll get into more. So I think, when we're talking about renewable energy production happening in the UK, it's of course crucial that we look to the supply chain and we talk about where are the minerals needed to make that manufacturing happen and that energy generation happen. And yeah, this is the topic of critical minerals, transition minerals has been increasingly in the news. And yeah, I'm sure everyone has an understanding of the fact that all types of renewable energy technologies have mineral demands. Yeah, whether it's solar panels, wind turbines, or the batteries needed for energy storage and for electric vehicles. But I think, and again, we can get into some of those specific technologies, some of the specific minerals they require, where those come from, the injustices being pushed. But I think one really important false binary to tackle is this idea that either we stick with an energy system based on fossil fuels, which is, of course, perpetuating huge injustices across the world and driving the world towards planetary, past our planetary boundaries, towards climate breakdown, or we have an energy system based on renewable energy, which leads to huge increases in mining and leads to the displacement of mining affected communities across the world. And we've got to pick one of these unjust imperialist energy systems to power our lives. But some of the work we do is to challenge that false binary, that false narrative, and to say that actually, if you look into what is causing these projections of increased mineral demands, it's not meeting the energy needs of working class communities across the UK. It's not generating renewable electricity. It's the inequitable and unsustainable consumption of the world's wealthiest, and it's corporate greed, it's profiteering, and it's a lie that we need these vast increases in mineral demands to meet the needs of a system based off renewable energy. And yeah, I know my colleague Diana is going to get into in more detail some of the injustices associated with the mining of the minerals we need for renewable energy technologies. So I'm not going to go into that in loads of detail, but I think just to talk about, I guess, center on the stakes of what we're talking about here. The argument and the narrative being pushed by mining companies, British mining companies, is, for example, that the world needs to extract as much copper in the next 20 years as we've extracted in the history of humanity. That comes from Rio Tinto, or that we need 40-fold increases in the UK's lithium demand. And yeah, a lot of people will be aware that the majority of the world's lithium reserves lie on indigenous lands between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And yeah, that inevitably, if you want to have electrified transport, that's necessarily going to mean the invasion of indigenous lands in Latin America, and huge diversions of water away from local consumption towards mining operations. This is the argument, it's a vision for green imperialism, for the perpetuation of a global system where there's deeply unequal and inequitable consumption of resources between the imperial core, the global north where we live, and the global south, and but also obviously within our country, as I say, the world's the country's richest and the corporations who are actually driving that demand. So just to get into that, firstly, a huge factor in these projections for increased mineral demands has nothing to do with energy, full stop. So we know that the military consumes huge amounts of minerals. NATO recently published a critical minerals list, which lays out the minerals where they see the supply chains as being constrained and where they argue that action is needed to, in inverted commas, secure NATO members' supply of those minerals to ensure that the huge expansions in military production that we're seeing across the world can be sustained. So copper, for example, is the material, the second most used material by the US military, for example. There's been some really great research in the US as well showing that if you electrified the entire US military fleet, that would create demand for battery minerals such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, um, that actually could power the public transport, produce public transport vehicles, to meet the needs of many tens of thousands. So yeah, we've got military demand, we've got the demands being driven by data centers, which are hugely energy intensive. Um, yeah. So even if we are yeah, obviously everyone's, and I know it was touched upon last time, um, the injustice being driven by renewable energy um, generation. It's just, and huge proportions of that would be diverted towards power hungry AI data technologies that are gathering pace. A third, so yeah, we can talk more about the demands for minerals coming from outside energy production. But then even if you are looking just at the projections for increased demand to do with energy itself, even there, the vast majority of that increased demand for a lot of the minerals we're talking about is being driven by electric vehicles. Um, so the UK has a relatively high manufacturing capacity for um, in the automotive sector. Like we, yeah, manufacture, produce a lot of vehicles. The government want to transition all of that production, so maintain existing levels of automotive production, but transition it entirely towards electric vehicle production. If that were to happen, that we would need nine, they're called gigafactories, which are these huge factories producing the lithium ion batteries that are needed for electric vehicles. Um, we've done some research into that because lithium ion batteries require lithium, nickel, and cobalt in huge proportions. And just to maintain the UK's existing level of automotive production, but for producing electric vehicles, the UK would require 20% of the lithium produced globally, um, just for the UK's automotive sector, 6% of the world's nickel, and 15% of the world's cobalt, as well as vast quantities of copper, although copper is slightly harder to quantify in that way. Um, and actually, if we're talking about a just energy transition that meets people's needs, that tackles mobility injustices, that tackles the huge inequalities in access to transit, that and yeah, problems with air pollution, etc., that we face with a transport system dominated by vehicles. Actually, if we were to like hugely invest in public transport and reduce the need for private vehicles, particularly obviously in cities, and there's modelling which shows that the projected increases in lithium demand could be brought down by 92% through investing in public transport, increasing battery recycling infrastructure, and reducing the size of vehicles, because the bigger the vehicle, the more minerals that are needed. Um, and I think, yeah, so that's obviously not a narrative that's going to sell well with the mining companies, which want to use the green transition as an excuse to hugely expand their operations, and yeah, expand their profits. But if we're talking about what a just energy transition would mean, obviously in relation to the automotive sector, we need to be talking about a worker-led transition that guarantees that workers are able to transition towards socially useful forms of production, maintaining it at the very minimum existing conditions and pay. And but we also need to be thinking about the global supply chain impacts of that transition. And yeah, is it socially necessary? Is it socially useful to be producing electric SUVs, or can we discuss what a more just transport system would look like, which isn't driving these huge mineral demand increases? So yeah, happy to go into that later in the discussion and some of those points in more detail. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jake. Brilliant. Loads of great information there, linking the UK to the global demands for mining and minerals. Um, Diana Salazar, Thanks for being with us tonight. She's the Latin American coordinator at London Mining Network, and who's going to speak a little bit about her work with communities affected by British linked mining companies. Hi,
Thank you
dear.
so much. Is it okay if I share a PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, yeah, maybe I just need to make it like this. Yeah?
Beautiful.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so thank you. Yeah, thank you for the invitation and thank you everyone for being here on this nice summer night. So I want to talk about whose transition, following from Jake's presentation. I think that's sort of a question that we remain asking. Well, just quickly to let you know who we are. LMN is an alliance of human rights, development, and environmental and solidarity organizations, and we work supporting human rights of people and nature, people affected by mines, but also workers affected also by the mines. And we work with communities around the world affected by mining linked mining companies. So it could be, for example, companies that are listed in the London Stock Exchange, or also that have their headquarters here in London. So I just wanted to start with this question of a transition from whom. As Amal commented, I work as the Latin American coordinator for London Mining Network, so I work a lot with Latin America. And one of the cases we have worked recently a lot is the communities affected in Colombia, in Cesar particularly, by coal extraction. Is everyone hearing well? Yes, all good. Okay. And basically the issue is that if we're talking about a transition, it's a transition from one what? And I think it's important in any transition to also look what are the legacies, no? What's what we are living from, and what are the issues that are still present of those things that we are living or finishing. So just the case of Glencore. Glencore is a Swiss company and is listed in the London Stock Exchange. It also had some headquarters here in London. And they have closed their mines in Cesar. They still have some open mines in La Guajira, another department in Colombia. But with the closure of the mines in Cesar, of coal mines, they have basically made mass redundancies that have left after when the mines, these mega mines appear to the regions, basically they concentrate and move the economy around them. It sort of destroys the local economy and generates an economy that orbits around the company. Once the company leaves, it breaks down again the economy for the place. And this is what happened with all the workers there, and obviously with the local communities that were attached to the salaries of these workers. But in addition, the local communities also are left with the mess, with the destruction of their ecosystems, and having to live with the environmental pollution left by the company. So on this, basically is what are the legacies, no? These legacies in these mines that have not been closed or are need to be closed, but not yet. So there's no accountability in this process of mining closure by the companies. And I want to invite you to read the report of Element that is called Cut and Run. And in that report, is a very interesting research on two mining companies and the way in which they destroyed the ecosystems once they start destruction, but at the same time, then they run. There's no accountability and there's no responsibility. It doesn't come from their pockets, the fixing out of the legacies. and is usually usually falls on governments, local governments, or just the people who has to bear with these consequences. And just because the invitation for tonight is from fuel poverty action, just to say that coal has not ended poverty for local people in these areas. And indeed, from the other mine in Colombia, what they have always said is that they didn't have money before the mine, but they were always rich before the mine. So they always had all what they needed. And so yeah, just a connection with the organization. So here I come back to the question of whose transition, no? So already Jake explained a lot how the different companies put out this discourse of the need of expanding the mining of copper, lithium, and many others. But for whom is that transition? Or for who's going to use those resources? And you already reflected on that with Jake. So I want to share with you some case studies of copper expansion in Chile and in Peru from two companies, Anglo American and Glencore. And to bring the idea that basically for an expansion of a mine, of the extraction of a mineral, you also are expanding the production of waste. And this is waste as tailings dams. I'm just going to say what it is, but also in the forms of batteries, as Jake was saying, no? These new cars are basically based on batteries. That is basically the creation of more waste, another waste problem for the world. Well, the tailings dams are basically some minerals to be you extract them from the earth, but then you need to take them apart from the rest of materials in order to have them. This is just the information of tailings dams. There's no like global way in which we measure or know where the tailings are. There's this global tailing portal where the companies voluntarily say where's the tailing and give information about that, but there's no like a systematic way to understand what is this problem about. And there's plenty of tailings that are reported to be retired. And there's plenty that are new and that are constantly growing. So just to point out that this is an everlasting problem that we have, and we don't really even understand it. And just here, just to mention, in particular, copper is a mineral that requires a lot of tailings. So it says for each ton of pure copper produced today, 740 tons of rock have to be blasted from the ground. And at the end of the process, there is over 400 tons of toxic waste needed to be disposed of. So this is what I mean. Jake was also mentioning some of this, but just to understand that is a huge amount of waste, of toxic waste, what is left from this. Okay, so this is just a Antapacay mine. One in Cusco in Peru is owned by Glencore. Well, this is the location. And this is the story of Elsa Merma. Elsa is she is an indigenous person from Espinar, and she is part of the platform of people affected by heavy metals. The fact that these dams, these tailings dams, are toxic waste has resulted in people having heavy metals in their body. So there's been research in which they have tested positive to urine, to blood tests, and this is basically the drama and the experiences of these people that have to live near with the waste of these copper mines, so important for the electrification that is proposed in this energy transition, and how to live with that. Obviously, it's not only humans, and for it to be in humans, it has have like a trip for the plants, the water, the animals. And for this, yeah, here's some reports from different organizations. The first one is an analysis of an NGO in Peru, and the first one is in Spanish, but is the Minister of the Environment of Peru produced this report. So this is a national level reports testing, or sort of proving that the testing has been positive for people, animals and plants in relationship with the mines. And I'm gonna share another case very briefly. That is the case of El Soldado mine in Chile. This is Anglo-American, and which I guess you all know, Anglo-American is a British company. And this mine is called El Soldado, and it is located in El Melón. So this is the tailings dam. This is how it looks. It's this huge pool, no, with this immense wall. And this is other of the consequences, possible consequences of the tailings dams. If you remember the case of Brazil, where there was this devastated break of the tailing dam, and how it polluted kilometers and kilometers from the mountains to the sea, killing people, but mainly disturbing the ecological regional scale, as well as the lives of everyone there. So this is just a photo of El Soldado. Like one of the things, anyway, just to mention quickly, is among the consequences that people living nearby the mines experience is, in most of the cases, there's forced displacement, and with this, the loss of their livelihoods. Even if they remain in the areas, then there's this huge pollution, which they have to live with, and that's so often affects also their livelihoods, because they cannot produce in the same way as before they did. There's also affected mainly indigenous and campesinos people that have a deep traditional knowledge on the way in which they use their territory, medicinal plants, the diversity around. This is the knowledge needed basically in this climate change, when you need to understand the diversity of a species, which one works well during rainy season, which one is better for droughts. In this transformation of our planet at the moment, is so important, this kind of knowledge. And this is what has been losing, because once people is displaced from their land, then the understanding and the notion of it starts being broken, starts losing, in getting involved in another process, in the process of survival, how to survive. Well, and obviously the destruction of ecosystems. I'll go back to El Melón. So this tailing dam is called El Torito. There you can see the mine as well, and then you can see so this, do you see my arrow? Yeah. So this is the tailing dam. This will be the mine, the site of extraction, and this will be the town. Everything so close. And there's a dispute between cattle association and farmers in this region and the company. And in this dispute, the community, the association, has some collective land that they want to divide it in order to use it individually, given that after COVID, people lose the possibility of other jobs, and we're needing more basically subsistence from the land. But Anglo American has opposed that decision, which is the decision of the association, as they are the owners of the land, and Anglo American sue this organization. Recently, the decision of the court was positive towards the association and negative towards Anglo American. So that is good news. but it's important to understand how this huge mining company has the possibility of suing small communities that own the land for the benefit of their own projects and their infrastructure. This is just another photo of El Torito. Yeah, and here again to invite you to our webpage. There was some letters about this legal dispute that were published in our webpage. So if you want to refer to them, there you can find them. And I want to finish with this question of whose transition. So Jake in a way showed how this transition is maybe not really necessarily benefiting neither the environment, not people in here. I have shown how this is not benefiting or attending the needs of people elsewhere in the sites of extraction in the global south, let's call it like that. So then whose transition is this? And I would like to, yeah, to finish there. And yeah, welcome any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Deanna. Wonderful presentation. We're already at the point at which I'm going to open up the space for everyone who's joined and listened to Jake and Deanna to ask some questions to our speakers. To do this, please look for the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to raise your hand and come in with your questions. To start us off, I think Jake and Deanna, I feel like the conversation is very much steered towards pointing out a lot of the flaws in the current transition that we have, in the transition as it's taking place. And I'm wondering if you have some perspectives on the direction that it really needs to take and the actions that need to be taken in order for it to be beneficial, if you see that as being possible.
Do you want to go ahead, Jake?
Sure, yeah. So I guess we can talk about like both supply and demand side solutions. So in terms of, and maybe, yeah, I'm sure Dana maybe will want to say more on this. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples provides a framework whereby theoretically Indigenous peoples should have sovereignty over their lands and the right to say no to mining projects. And there are many global coalitions and networks of Indigenous peoples demanding that the right to say no is respected. And yeah, we know that that's not being at all enforced in. So the mining industry talk a lot about standards, and you'll hear various acronyms around sustainable, green mining, future smart mining. But across the board, these are standards initiatives where the mining companies sit on the boards that determine what the standards are, and there's no legal accountability or enforcement mechanisms. And yeah, so I think fundamentally that is the number one thing that we would advocate, is that, yeah, communities should have the right to decide whether mining happens in their territories or not. Obviously, if it is to happen and communities do want it to happen, the value from the mining operations should stay with the communities and in the countries where extraction is happening. We know that a huge part of the critical minerals strategies, and yeah, there's a lot more we could get into with those being driven by global north states, are to do with international trade mechanisms. So it's around neocolonial imperialist trade mechanisms which push mineral-rich countries into continuing to expand extraction and also then sell those minerals at artificially cheap rates as a continuation of unequal exchange. So, for example, Indonesia implemented a ban on raw nickel ore being exported in order to try and ensure that the processing of that ore takes place within Indonesia, and therefore more value is added when it's then sold on in global markets. And I mean, there are huge injustices being perpetrated through the mining and processing of nickel in Indonesia, and it's not at all to endorse. The huge industrial nickel parks which are driving indigenous peoples off their lands. But the response from the EU to that was to take out a World Trade Organization trade tribunal mechanism dispute to basically challenge Indonesia's decision and to attempt to continue forcing them to sell the raw ore on global markets in order for the EU and I mean the UK certainly as well to continuing to access artificially cheap nickel ore with none of those profits from the hugely destructive nickel mining activities going to communities in Indonesia. And then, I guess to move on to demand side solutions, like obviously I talked about scaling down socially harmful and unnecessary consumption, which would allow you to divert the existing mineral resources that are in circulation away from socially harmful, destructive forms of production like military technologies towards those that we genuinely need for decarbonisation. But then also there's many things you can do in relation to, for example, with electric vehicle batteries, when they're no longer powerful enough to continue using in electric vehicles, they still maintain 80% of their power, which means they can then be reused in grid storage because they're still powerful enough to do that. So reusing renewable energy technologies. I mean, if we're talking about wind turbines, like steel, iron ore is like a huge mineral demand that's being pushed through the construction of wind turbines. Not enough of that iron ore is being recycled, even though or to take the example of lithium, only 1% of lithium through lithium-ion batteries is currently being recycled. The reason that this circular economy model is not happening is because it's not profitable. It's cheaper to dispose of lithium-ion batteries than it is to recycle them, which again, I guess we haven't really talked about the question of ownership, but if we have an energy system controlled by corporations and privatized energy supply chains, then we're never going to have true circular economy measures because they're simply not profitable. We're never going to be paying countries where we are importing minerals from at a fair price that reflects the labour value that went into producing them, because that's not going to be profitable to corporations. So ultimately we need a publicly owned energy system where these deliberations around how to minimise and reduce demand can be made in a socially and globally equitable way.
Thank you for that.
So if you want, I could add something, and I think is also about understanding the discourse. So the discourse I see from the corporations is this idea of an energy transition in order to tackle climate change and the ecological crisis in which we are at the moment. Nevertheless, in their strategy, you never see it's a strategy, as I see, of continuing an ever-growing energy consumption. So I reckon this starts in the point where our society currently started and the economic system and so on with the consumption of energy and of always growing energy consumption. That's the whole way in which the production can be sustained. So I think the point is that to think of an energy transition does not respond to the ecological crisis. So I think what we need to look at is how are we understanding the limits of nature and how are we moving to a system that lives in the limits of nature, instead of thinking that we can and that's the other point. It's not a transition. What we have been looking, for example, in my research, in my personally, but also many people have been looking at the fact that fossil fuels are not decreasing. The consumption of them has been increasing coal, for example, has always been increasing in its production. So it's not to reduce the consumption of energy at all or to transition it. It's really to increase the access to energy. So I reckon that's the main pivotal point, and that is basically linked to our lifestyle. That energy overconsumption is needed because of the lifestyles we have. It's because the amount of cell phones, but also computer, but also tablet, but let me have this other gadget that does exactly the same, but I want another one, and having to change it all the time, and the obsolescence that is integrated in all this system of overconsumption and overproduction. So I reckon basically an energy system will need to look into basically that is not tackling the energy system, the energy problem. It's not that, it's not tackling either um, the ecological restoration that needs to be taken. So really what we should be doing is planting trees and seeing how we are destroying those ecological connections and also our relationship with nature. Yeah, but just some ideas there, we can continue.
Thank you very much, Diana. Lee, you had your hand up, but you took it down.
You kind of asked my questions there. I'll posit this. So, you what's Jake mentioned that the kind of none of these companies or states are respecting the Charter of Indigenous Rights, and I agree. So, has he heard of the Progressive International and various kind of global South states are proposing an OPEC, which is for people that don't know, OPEC was when in the 1950s onward, through decolonization, the various states with lots of oil club together to say this is our oil, and the USA and the UK are not going to just take it for no money. So there's been a proposal for states with critical minerals, and a lot of these are based in the global south, to form a kind of OPEC of critical minerals. Have you heard of this? And what do you think of this idea?
Jake,
So
Diana, yeah, please come on in. Either of you. Sorry to interrupt.
So yeah, I mean, what you describe, I think, is what happened, no? Like in the second wave of colonialism after the Second World War, I think they basically started taking, no, and organizing like that. I think I mean, my very personal and humble position on that is that I think is a whole economic and political system that drives and behaves in that way and drives everyone to behave in that way. Obviously, I mean, yeah, this is just my opinion. I think the point is not only who manages to compete and win in a capitalist system, is indeed who manages to subsist in an earth that has limits. So I also think I mean, it should be ways of regulating use, consumption, and maybe, I don't know, sharing strategies, things like this is what we should be thinking about, no? Resources are in different places. Some of them are definitely needed, some others not. But definitely there's still lots of embedded lifestyles that need to be transformed. And also, I mean, it's not it's not a reality that humans have not lived before. We have lived in a different way without so much energy and being, I mean, there's plenty of ways of architecture that could work differently. Just, I mean, there's some technological things of the past that we could bring and will be of plenty of use now. I think what is important is the fact that there's this political economy that drives everything, the innovation, the research, and all that is looking into in who has money to put for that research and so on, instead of what will make us survive as a species and keep the life in the planet. So I reckon is the focus that possibly. But yeah, I mean, I respect that they did it, and I reckon because they did it. It has many issues, and it has plenty of inequalities that has been created that way. And I reckon, I mean, if you look into the pink tide in Latin America, I think the fact that revolutions have been sort of based on fossil fuels have been one of the main issues for them not to move forward, because they're not attending the ecological reality that we are living. That is basically this super hot summer we have today.
Thank you, Diana. Lee, did you want to come back in? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just clarify. Yeah, I agree. Yes, capitalism is the problem, without a doubt. You didn't say the word, but you basically described it. And the point I'm saying is, I don't know whether you, maybe I didn't say it properly, but the powers that be in the world, the USA, the UK, are not going to follow their own rules. They're not following their own rules in Palestine. They're doing a genocide. They don't give a shit about these things. So what I'm talking about is accepting this power dynamic and whether global South countries should do an OPEC of critical minerals, whether that would be a way of combating this. And so I don't know if that was my point, but I agree completely with what you said. It is the problem is consumption, fossil capital, etc., techno feudalism, blah blah blah. But yeah.
So it's more about whether you think global South countries should sort of take control, have more sovereignty
Yeah, and
over
I mean
over
they
their
are,
resources. Yeah.
and they're in the process of doing this. I'm just wondering what the people think, because there's the Hague group that are meeting in Colombia today and yesterday, talking about doing something about Palestine. So yeah.
Jake?
Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, so that like there are examples of, yeah, I guess attempts to gain more value from mineral exports. The DRC, for example, has banned the export of cobalt for the past, I believe, for the past 4 months, which is the world's biggest producer of cobalt. And there's been some talks about potential collaboration between the DRC and Indonesia, which is the world's second biggest cobalt producer. There's been talk of like within the lithium triangle of a potential. I think you can't talk about an OPEC for critical minerals because they're so geographically dispersed, and depending on the mineral, some are abundant, like across the world, whereas others are concentrated in a small number of countries. So I guess, yeah, it's only really possible where there's that geographical concentration. But with lithium, yeah, as I said, over the majority of the world's lithium reserves lie between three countries, in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. I think that's talk of that has kind of fallen apart because of the sharply divergent resource governance models you see between on the one hand, Bolivia's model of maintaining a sovereign model where the state owns over 50% of the rights to the lithium reserves, in partnership with multinational corporations, versus obviously Argentina, where you've got an aggressive neoliberal model of incentivizing investment at the cost of any social or labour regulations. But I guess the question for us should be like, what is our role within London, within the UK? And I think absolutely we should be opposing any attempts by the UK government to constrain the sovereignty of mineral-rich nations to impose export controls or to attempt to gain more value from their resources. But I think that's not sufficient because obviously I've talked about a lot of countries there, like the DRC, where, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, it's extremely horrific labor exploitation, eradication of trade unions, widespread child labor, not just in artisanal mines, but also in the supply chain for the industrial mines. And Glencore, a partly British and also Swiss, as Diana said, company, are huge profiteers from those mineral resources. So it's not enough for us to say the UK should be allowing the DRC to pursue attempts to gain more value from their cobalt. We also need to be thinking about the multinational corporations, the British multinational corporations, which are controlling vast waves of the world's resources. And and attempting to use the power that we have within London, within the UK, to fight these companies and to stand in solidarity with the communities on the front lines of those injustices.
Thank you, Jake. I'm going to move on to Ruth and Fiona and Carrie. Thank you for. We'll get to your questions for sure. Thanks for your patience. Ruth, you're muted.
Fiona, do you want to go first?
Fiona,
No, you're muted. I've got to go to another meeting now, so I was just typing my question in, hoping that Diana might be able to contact me. So I have a meeting at 1:30, so I do have to go now. So thank you, Ruth, but I'll leave my question as a written one, my email address. So I apologise. I've found it very useful, very interesting, I want to be able to use some of the insights in a practical way here in Durham, where I'm involved in green transition union stuff. But I've got to go now, so bye all, and thank you all.
I'll get back to
What a
you.
shame.
Yeah.
Helen, thank you. Thank you. Maybe we could look at Fiona's question, and Diana could answer it for the rest of us, if not for Fiona. I think it's broadly applicable. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Fiona, there will be a recording which will be sent around, and you should get that because you signed up to the session. So you should be able to hear the answer to your question in any case.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Carrie, did you want to go?
Yes, okay. Well, in a way, I'm thinking because people have talked about other countries taking control, producing countries taking control of their resources, and I was just looking up. I couldn't remember quite whether it was Mexico or Brazil, but Mexico has nationalized its lithium resources, has it not? And I just wondered if you saw that as a kind of progressive use that they're making of it, or is it still a pretty exploitative extractive industry? That was one point. And then I was just about to say, I mean, right at the beginning, Jake said about, where the greatest use of minerals is. And he mentioned the military and NATO, kind of terrifying amounts of minerals being used. And we kind of know in this country that with the current government and all the European governments, just with the drive to war is absolutely shocking, and the upping of the amount of money that's being spent. I mean, I'm part of the People's Assembly, I'm part of Unite Community, I'm part of Sheffield Trade Union Council, and it's this kind of we're trying to get together to. And of course, we live in Sheffield, and Sheffield has always its economy has relied hugely, unfortunately, on munitions manufacture, and that is going up and up and up at the minute. And particularly to do with Palestine, there's been protests at various companies that are manufacturing parts for F-35s, but on a general basis, it's one of the Unite branches brought a motion to our Trades Council the other day about it's swords to plowshares is a kind of tone of it, and we're holding a meeting based on CND has produced a report called the Alternative Defence Review, which I haven't, to be honest, I've only read certain sections of it. It's quite an extensive report, and I'm not quite sure if it touches on how it affects environmentally. I mean, there's all the myth about how it creates jobs, and but it doesn't. So I'm just wondering if the London Mining Network have kind of picked up on that, or will be kind of part of that. And the first bit was just asking about Mexico's position. Thank you.
Cheers, Carrie.
I'm happy to go on the second one. We've done a lot of work around the links between mining and militarism. I'm just going to put a link in the chat about a report called Martial Mining that that we wrote that was produced in 2020, which talks about not the links between militarism and mining as being a vicious cycle. So not just that military equipment and technologies requires vast amount of minerals, but also that the resistance of mining affected communities is often met by militarized repression. So you can have this vicious cycle where the very minerals being extracted from communities' lands are being used to produce the weapons, which are then used to suppress them. And there are many examples of militarized repression of mining affected communities, and obviously killings of environmental defenders. We know extractive industries are the leading industry globally for the killing of environmental defenders. So I think it's absolutely crucial that that's brought into these spaces around what a transition away from an industrial strategy based on defense production. I guess, as you rightly said, it's obviously a myth that this is a sort of form of job creation, and that the Keir Starmer's rhetoric around sort of almost like family-owned weapons manufacturing companies, that it's going to create this huge reindustrialization of the country and prosperity, whereas obviously we know the vast majority of those public subsidies are going towards BAE Systems and the big multinational defense companies. I think that ties in with the work that we're more engaged with, which is around a just transition for workers in the automotive industry, because I think there's parallels there. It's in both cases we know that it's a socially harmful form of production that currently exists, and we need a transition away from it. But we can't just be talking about the injustices of batteries, supply chains, or of the uses of weapons and military. Like, we need to also be connecting with workers, and workers need to be designing what those socially just alternatives look like. So we have been doing work to build links, particularly within Unite, actually. So the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus are leading a lot of that work to try and provide space for activists within Unite to have these conversations. We recently produced a blog around a just transition for workers in the automotive industry, which talks about some of the supply chain justices, but also tackling some of those myths. Basically just to say that we're very keen to be more involved in those discussions and connect with particularly people within Unite and other trade unions. And maybe next year it'd be great to have a motion or an amendment to a motion going to the National Policy Conference, which talks about critical minerals and supply chain injustices. I'll leave my email in the chat, and it'd be great to connect further.
Thank you, Jake.
So on the question of Mexico, so I reckon the fortune that I work with communities in Latin America allows me to respond from what I have heard from them when they are sort of posting these things. I think it is great that is national. This is just my personal opinion. Is that I think it is great it is nationalized instead of in the hands of big multinationals. But at the same time, what I have heard from many people and is that basically corporate extraction or mega mining is just not sustainable. So it's not only about nationalizing the resources, but it's also about how is that we are extracting them. There's no corporate extraction that is sustainable, that's for sure. Could a government have a sustainable extraction? We will need to see what that is. No, we haven't seen it. Russia, for example, has nationalized it's coal. We don't see, there's a report from Coal Action Network on the extraction of coal in Russia used here in the UK. And they basically spell out a similar pattern of behavior with their own people as the one I expressed before for copper in other places. So I reckon, that's what is important to understand. No any corporate extraction is sustainable, that's for sure. Now, if governments are gonna do it different, I think the point goes back into what are the sources of, I mean, what are the reasons for extraction? Is this to keep us in the same system, or is this any transformative way of understanding the ecology of the earth and the amount of things that we need, and the difference with what we desire and or what this society inspires us to desire.
Thank you very much for that, Diana. I just want to say before bringing Steve or Ruth in that we have just been joined by Councillor Andrew Long from who's here from Cornwall. Andrew, I don't actually know which on which council you sit. Are you also a councillor for Kernow? Sorry, not for is it Penryn?
There we go. Hello. Good evening, everybody. My name's Andrew Long. I'm one of the three Mebyon Kernow Cornwall councillors on Cornwall Council. But I cover the Far East. I cover Callington and St Dominic, which borders the Tamar Valley. Beautiful part of the world, but obviously with its own issues as well. And I got the call yesterday afternoon from Mile, who was unfortunately otherwise occupied today. And as I explained to Amal earlier on, I was, as well as being a Cornwall councillor, I also drive HGV lorries. As everybody in Cornwall does 3 jobs at once. And I've just been to Southampton and Bournemouth. So I literally got back into the house about 20 seconds ago.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Andrew. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as you can see, like you know, we've been in our conversation's been in full swing. But do you wanna just launch into you know, say a few things about what's happening in Cornwall? You know, the planned lithium mining, the views of local people. I know that Mail also plan to maybe talk a little bit about some bigger ideas in terms of how lithium mines in Cornwall can, you know, sort of maybe disrupt the patterns of mining from and its place in colonialism.
Well, I was just a bit of a background. I've been involved in Cornwall Council since 2009 when it was created after the disbandment of the 6 districts. And before that, I was 2 years on Cllr District Council, which covered the east of Cornwall. And we've had various numbers of Cornwall councillors from 3 to 5 and 6 at one stage. And despite the attempts to reduce the democracy in Cornwall and then the onslaught of the reform tidal wave in 2025, we managed to retain 3 of our seats with decent majorities. So we're still fighting the good fight. For me, it's very strange because I actually, along with the 3 jobs I do, I also sing in a shanty group, and we sing about mining, we sing about fishing, we sing about the things that used to happen in Cornwall in 200 years ago. And where I live, which is in Eastern Cornwall, we are also subject at the moment of a potential mine reopening. This will be a tungsten mine, which will be starting at about 300 meters and going down at 45 degrees after that. So we have a Cornwall Mineral Resources, or Cornwall Resources now, which is an Australian Cornish company, but funded on the world stock market, who is looking at extracting minerals from there. Very much tuned to that, and lithium mining. It is very much a double-edged sword for the people of Cornwall, because people of Cornwall suffer from a double whammy at the moment of high prices and low income. We have the lowest GVA of any of the regions of the UK, whilst we have some of the highest prices of anywhere in the UK. Anybody who I don't know who might come from the southwest or might come from Cornwall, but we have Southwest Water, which cover us, which has a massive impact on us because they're the second highest water charges anywhere in the country. but on a population that has some of the lowest incomes. So whilst we have a great quality of life, and anybody who's been to Cornwall will know how wonderful a place it is, we have a very low standard of living. So with regards to the communities, especially around St Austell, where the lithium mining company are looking at starting, the impact on that is very much, as I said, a double-edged sword. The clay country in St Austell has been how would you best describe it? Has been ravaged, some would say, but has been there is the look of it now, which is almost like like the surface of the moon in places, comes from 200 years of mining. Now, unfortunately, in the past, mining was very much a rich person's occupation if you owned the mine. But for anybody who worked in a mine, it's very much a poor person's occupation. The wages are incredibly low. The life expectancy was very, very low. And what has changed now is the attempt from these mining companies to look at working with our local university, our local colleges, because mining in the 21st century in Cornwall will become a degree occupation. So it won't be something that you'll just leave school with even your A levels and go into it. It's going to be a degree occupation because of the changes in mining. So there is a potential for some good money, but also there's the danger that will come with it, of what potential impact that might have on the local ecology and the local economy. And also the fact that because these companies are multinational companies, the danger that any profit will disappear into the ether and won't actually benefit the people of Cornwall. So as Cornwall councillors, we are working very, very hard to be critical friends when it comes to mining, to talk to them, because there is a potential, and we have to accept the fact that at the moment, I came in on the end of the conversation regarding the Russia situation, but 90% of, I believe, from the tungsten produced in the world comes from China. But tungsten is used everywhere. So at the moment, we are suffering from the fact that we have the UK as a whole, and Cornwall in particular, has a degree of reliance on somebody else. But what we are in danger of finding is that this golden goose, the potential golden goose, will not actually benefit the people of Cornwall who will be working at it. So as MK councillors, along with the Green Party, along with some of the independents, we are talking about, and in fact, there's a motion going to Cornwall Council next week demanding from the government the quality on devolution to enable Cornwall to take more control of what happens within our borders. As anybody, I don't know, as I said, I don't know how many of you have been to Cornwall before, but we are not a part of England. Our history is not part of England. Our culture is not part of England. The English culture, not better, not worse, just different. We have our own language, you have our own music, but we don't hate anybody. We love Cornwall, but you can do that without hating any other group, which I think is really important. And you love other cultures while also protecting your own culture as well. So as the Cornish, we are trying to preserve what is good about Cornwall, but also trying to make sure that the average wages of the people, the average wages of the people of Cornwall are brought up to the UK average at least. But the problem at the moment we're getting is that as wages go up everywhere else, they go up in Cornwall, but they're still way behind, and they still stay way behind unless we can get an injection of good quality jobs. So that's what's happening in Cornwall at the moment. As I said, there is a view amongst some of the Cornish population that the potential lithium mine, and more importantly, the tungsten mining, could actually provide some decent benefit for the people of Cornwall. But at the moment, we have our concerns that like in the past, the rich will get rich, but the majority of people in Cornwall will just stay as they are. So there we are. That's a very, very short resume at a moment's notice, having thought about it as I was driving through the traffic jams of Dorset on the way home. There we go, Mal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, that was brilliant and very eloquent for something you thought about in about something you thought up in about half an hour. So thank you. Um, yeah, I will just uh, carry on with the swing of questions. And please also, those of you that have your hands up, direct your questions to Andrew, wherever they are. And Andrew, please feel free also to just chime in where you feel you can. Steve, you've been waiting for a little while.
I was before actually.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ruth, it's true. You have been waiting even longer.
Yeah,
Ruth.
wait on that. Yeah, Andrew, I think I don't know if you all are getting in touch with people in other parts of Europe who are actually resisting mines. I know Lee met with quite a lot of them recently and could probably put you in touch. They've generally found that the although you do hope for some benefits from it, very often they just come in, devastate your community, and wreck all the other potential jobs in the area, including tourism, and walk away with the profits and leave the mess. And I think being in touch with some of them who are like experienced in that might be useful to you all.
Well,
so you
we do, yeah. Thank you.
Lee
Sorry,
on this call.
sorry, Ruth. My apologies.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can.
what I was
No,
going to say
okay.
was as MK, we're part of the European Free Alliance, so
Right.
we work with the SNP, Plaid Cymru in the UK, but we also there's 56 other parties covering the whole of the mainland Europe, and we have obviously representation in the European Union,
Yeah,
and we
but
do
it's not
have
quite
regular.
the same
Yeah, we do have
as
but what I mean is with our parties, we are discussing various issues, including mining, including fishing, including agriculture, including tourism, including general economic development, because the Atlantic arc of the Celtic nations have been for decades mismanaged by the centre of whichever government, whichever nation is controlling them. And we've been a victim of that for decades and decades and decades. But what I would probably possibly pick you up on is Cornwall is a mining nation. It is if you go in. If I was to show you a camera now, I could span around to there's a hill just next to us called Braes Gill, which is Kit Hill. That has 39 pit mine workings, just that I can see from here. Cornwall has a rich history of mining, but the problem with it, which is what you've hit on, is that profit has never stayed in Cornwall. The only houses you see were the mine owners' houses. Everybody else lived, and if you go to any part of Cornwall, you'll see the old miners' cottages, which are basically one up, one down, and that's where people are still living now, in one up, one down, with issues of radon gas, with issues of all sorts of issues which we have. But we've also got to accept the fact that in a modern world that we live in, tungsten is the king, whether we like it or not. In Cornwall, tungsten is a king, and at the moment, we need to be fighting to make sure that if it is going to happen, and we are one party and the Greens are another one, if it is going to happen, we have got to make sure that the best deal possible and the best protection possible is given to the people of Cornwall and to the land of Cornwall, because we've already been ravaged by industrialization for the last 300 years. And in fact, if you travel all around Europe, especially Southern Europe and the Scandinavia, you'll find 50 countries who have a word for Cornwall that's not Cornwall. They have a word in their own language for us, because we traded with mining with in the past for centuries, for 1,000 years. So we have a rich history of it. But at the moment, but in the past, it's always been controlled by others and never controlled by the people, which is where the frustration comes. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Ruth.
Andrew, can I come back? Because before you spoke, I actually had my hand up for other
Oh,
parts
right.
of the
Okay.
discussion,
Yes. Apologies.
if that's okay. And some of it's we've had discussion about work, and there's quite a lot of things that people are afraid of that are preventing people, I think, from grabbing the grabbing what actually has to happen if we're going to get out of the dilemma that they've got us in now. The unions, I noticed Fiona's note. The unions are defending work, socially useful work, and any work. And it's as if actually work is some sort of liberation. For most people, work is not a liberation. Being without work and without money is definitely not a liberation either. It's terrible. But there is enough resources in the world for everybody to have a decent standard of living without killing ourselves, doing a lot of work that is not necessary. And, I think that the talk that we've had today about the resources that are not necessary, cutting down demand for minerals because we don't need so much if we're not going to be wasting a huge amount of it, blowing up a huge amount of it, and so on. That's all paralleled by the fact that we wouldn't have to work so much if we weren't just working for profit. And it's kind of like a big elephant in the room. It's so big that you almost can't see it. The fact that probably the majority of the work that we do and the majority of the resources that we use are actually for the purpose of profit and not for human need and not even for human pleasure. So I think the unions have they're built around work, they're defending work, and even if it's destructive work, they'll defend it. But that's not a way forward for any of us, whether it's like mining in Cornwall or in Latin America or in tar sands in Canada. And one of the questions I wanted to ask, but I'm not finished with what I'm trying to say. One of the questions I wanted to ask is what's being done to connect the people who are fighting over mining for fossil fuels with people who are mining for other minerals, because it seems like one's about renewable energy and one's about fossil fuels, but actually so many of the issues are the same. But anyway, that's one thing. People are afraid of losing work. People are also afraid of lower consumption. And we had this dilemma when we started Climate Camp. And some people from Climate Camp were going onto Oxford Street at Christmas time in Father Santa suits, handing out leaflets saying you don't need to consume so much. And they were not popular. And some of us said, watch out, because people don't have much. Most people in this country don't have much. And it verges on saying, actually, you need austerity. And people are very right, to be frightened of that when you talk about lowering consumption. Insulation, yes, they can see that if you insulate your home and you don't need to burn so much fuel, that's a good thing. But lowering consumption in general is a hard thing to do. The other thing people are afraid of is that the resources of the global south and maybe Cornwall will go untapped in terms of improving people's lives. And the one who I saw who really confronted that is Chavez in Venezuela, who, that Venezuela, that revolution built itself on oil. But he was very plain that it couldn't stay that way and that they had to stop producing oil because it was going to destroy the world. And he had the oil workers in Venezuela on side with that. So I think what we need to do, in view of the fact that people are afraid of all these things for very good reasons, is find ways to connect demand reduction with very concrete demands where it will make people's lives better. And I really appreciate Fiona's question. And I think if there's time, which there may not be now, it would be good if people could speak to that. That some of the ways that we've found in fuel poverty action are energy for all, whereas energy use is based on need. That much you get free. That's one. Now our new pivot to renewables, where we're saying that the excess that's produced by renewables when the wind blows should be used by people in fuel poverty, not by battery farms. I think confronting the military and probably AI and possibly the great shibboleth of growth, those are other demands that possibly can help to make that transition to making lowering demand be something that people want to fight for and not fight against. And I'm going to shut up. Sorry for being long.
Not at all, Ruth. Thank you for that. I'm wondering if we have any comments before moving on to Cynthia, who still has her hand up.
And Steve, where's he gone?
I'm here.
Steve, I'm sorry. I had been waiting a long time now.
All right.
Steve, do you wanna come in or should I
Yeah, really,
yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Just pick up on what Lee. Can you hear me? Can people hear?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. First of all, picking up on what Lee said about this global South OPEC, and then when you sort of tie it in with the reality that, for example, Bolivia owns 50% plus of its own minerals in cahoots with these multinationals, and the DRC has banned the export of cobalt, but still actually uses child labour. I think it is very obvious when you only scratch the surface that the system is actually not improving. It's an intensification of the same problems. So, going to the ladies mentioning of Mexico renationalizing lithium, I would suspect that it's a distraction, nothing more than that. And when we talk about transition, there isn't a transition. There's only a transition in the sense that assets are being reconsolidated by moving them over into towers of gold. So, you've got just vertical integration of increased capital. And so what the sort of reality is something like, using a metaphor, we have palaces in the sky working together in unison, with everyone else subsisting or doing a little better underneath. Everything covered over in a sort of opaque and impenetrable film of great wealth. And when we talk about mega mining is not sustainable, which I'm sure our friend from South America pointed out very aptly, it's a tailing of dams bursting 2.0. I would suspect that Adrian's Cornish double-edged sword in countries like Bolivia is not a double-edged sword. It's a triple-edged sword, or even more edges. And they're very serrated and very covered in blood. And also about Cornwall, no mention of the property market, of the intensification of the property market. I mean, although Andrew, of course, pointed out that the poor are finding it more costly to live, when you have a property market driving the economy, we can't expect mining to go in the people's favour. No mention at all in the discussion about the US and how it probably everything centrally pivots around US economics, US driven capitalism 2.0 economics. Yeah, I've said enough. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. We really appreciate that. Cynthia.
Thank you. I don't really know where to start. After the last two or three speakers, I'm thinking, yeah, I don't want to just be repeating what they've said. But some things that come to mind from the conversation. And I should say to start with, I did teach business management once. That wasn't where I started. I taught literature first, and, then got moved and you have to go and teach business management. So I know all about the IMF, and so did my students in the end. And that's something everybody should understand, and they don't understand. But there are, for me, every time I'm working in Unite, was a councillor for years and years, and now absolutely committed to a different kind of politics. But that is about a different starting point. Let's assume everybody's got enough to live on. Everybody can be comfortable. Everybody can get some food. It's all up there for free. I have a lot of sympathy with Yanis Varoufakis' idea of a basic income. It is an idea that simply says we're not all trying to climb above the other person. And then if we're not all trying to climb above the other person, those people who do want to do that by exploiting us all really haven't got quite as good a position to keep them going, because none of us want to be there. There was there's a legend, isn't there? I'm not good on Greek mythology, but the king who touched everything that turned it to gold, and he touched his star. That antithesis between valuing something and really loving it or caring for it. And if we can't build that into our society, I think we're on a hiding to nothing, because we're just saying to people, well, if we do it this way, you can be on top instead of the others being on top. Is that what we want to be? I think we're being challenged right now. Do we want to win, or do we just want to? I'm not referring this to people here. I mean, I'm sure you're all inspired by a sense of, undoing what is wrong. But we just have to be careful that we're not then not just undoing what is wrong, but putting something else in its place. If we don't want this to be the goal, then that becomes it. I think I better be quiet then. I could ramble on for ages. Thank you for letting me say.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Really appreciate those thoughts. I'm just going to bring it to attention that is 8:02. Perhaps we can finish off with thoughts on Fiona's question, which she did write out in the chat. I'm going to read it out. Fiona said, "Great global overview. Thank you. I have to, here in Durham, I'm getting more involved in just transition stuff via the unions. The question I wanted to ask was, unions focus on jobs. I think she meant not just socially useful jobs, but any jobs. Given the insights in the session, how can I include these in my conversations so that they can be translated into action, union motions, or education? I'd love to hear more from Deanna."
Okay, so again, drawing from the communities I work with, I'm gonna talk about Sintra Carbón, which is the union of Cerrejón coal mine in La Guajira in Colombia. And Sintra Carbón has been able, I think, as very few unions, has been able to integrate some of the demands of the communities affected by the extraction of coal into their demands. One of those, very memorable, the diversion. I always get emotional with this. The diversion of a river. And what the union said is that this is wrong. This is wrong for this land. So we want to extract and we want to have a job, but not passing over the lives of Wayu people, but differently, and they opposed that. That was one of the plans of expansion of this mine. So I think that's one of the things. I mean, we need to politicize again unions, I think. I think unions need to get back into the right track and what is the my very humble opinion, and what is really what people need. Not everyone is part of a union, and unions don't necessarily are representing like real calls that people on the streets in London are asking for example. So I think, but I think it's possible. Sintra Carbon shows us how that is also possible. So I think that for her, and just to talking about Durham, and maybe I just want to say with the intervention of Andrew, uh, coal extraction, for example, in Durham, also generated, as Andrew explained, money for some and a very poor life for others. But also, I think in the context of the British coal mining extraction of that time, it also managed to create communities. When we talk about open cast, which is what I guess, I mean, will come with lithium in Cornwall, this is a different game. This is not about community building. This is because you need this huge amount of workers and 200 years to create these strong unions and these strong connections of communities that existed in Durham around the coal extraction. But when we're talking about open cast, we're talking about very limited number of jobs, well paid, as you said, but also usually the people with the skills needed don't come from the local areas. That has to be people that is brought from other areas where there's universities and so on. Yeah, and just to say that we have in the past worked, for example, with the campaign to protect the Pont Valley in Durham, and yeah, and we'll be happy as London Mining Network to connect with you and to work with you on the sort of the issues that are going on there in resisting mining.
Thank you for that, Diana. I want to invite Jake and Andrew also for some final thoughts before we close.
Do you want to go first, Andrew? I'll go after you.
I've unmuted myself now. It's been a long day. Thank you, Jake. What I was going to suggest was that that we're in danger, and I think there've been some really valid comments that's made this evening, but we're in danger of mixing long-term ideas with the immediate problems we have now. And that's my concern is we have immediate problems now. I've got families I'm dealing with in the lower quartile of my Callington West area, super output area, who are having to balance heating versus eating. That's real fuel poverty here today now. We've got a food bank which is running way over what it was ever supposed to be built as, because we've got so many people desperate for food. We have I work on a soup run. We go into the city of Plymouth across the water into England, and we feed over 100 people a night in a small city with food. Obviously, we don't ask questions of them, but that's happening now. That's happening in a supposedly sixth richest country in the world. We are having that problem now. So what we need is short-term solutions and long-term solutions. The short-term solutions is how we deal with the poverty, the fuel poverty, which is happening this second. And, you know, I'm on the way here this evening. I had a phone call from a family desperate to get a food bank because they just can't survive. And this is somebody who works for a living. This is a full-time job, and they're really struggling. So there is a long-term passion and a long-term thing as to almost changing the world, but there is a short-term reality which we're dealing with today, and that is that, and I couldn't even begin to think what's happening in Colombia, but when you're looking at the sixth richest country in the world, every single community has food banks, every single community has soup runs, every single community people are having to choose between heating and eating. And it's not so bad now in the summer, but when we get to November and December here in Cornwall, it does get pretty chilly, not on the scale of the north of England, not on the scale of some of the Nordic countries. But for people who are not used to it, it becomes very, very cold. And we have an aging population here as well. We also have age poverty, where people are poor and supposedly retired. We got people in their 80s working still because they cannot afford to retire. So there is some. So what I'll be looking for, and what we as in Cornwall are looking for, is what we're going to do tomorrow, not what we're going to do in a decade or what we plan for the decade, but how do we deal with the fuel poverty that's happening now? How do I look after Mr. and Mrs. Tresize who cannot afford to heat their home at night because they haven't got the money? And either if they have the money to heat it, they don't have money for food. And that's the reality of the sixth richest country of the world. And that is really sad. And that is what we are desperate to try to sort out. So whilst the mining situation, so I'm really sorry, Jake, I'll take up your time here, so my apologies. The real thing, the mining we're talking about, lithium mining is the one I'm not familiar as Mile is with that, because I'm covering the east. The mine we're looking at here is a pithead mine, not because of the depth it's got to go down. But the result is still the same, in that the profit will potentially go to the few and not the wealth to the many. But that's a long-term thing. What I've got to look at now is how do I get Mr. and Mrs. Tresize to be able to be in comfort this winter, being able to eat food and heat their homes. And that's where the real fuel poverty, our poverty it can't really be compared to the poverty that some other nations have to deal with in South America, for example. It's on a different scale, absolutely different scale, but it's relative to where we are. And for us, there is still poverty going on in Cornwall now. As I say, we are the lowest GVA of anywhere in the country, anywhere in the UK, but some of the highest prices. And I think it was Steve asked about what about the prices. Yes, we are property-led economy at the moment, and the problem we've got is a property-led economy that's not led in Cornwall. It's led in London. It's led in the southeast of England. It's led by rich oligarchs who can spend £1 million on a house that they then knock down and put in a multi-bedroomed unit overlooking the sea. And we have dozens. I have 26,000 families on the housing waiting list, waiting for a house in Cornwall. Our population is 500,000. So it just goes to show the reality of it. We have 26,000 families or individuals on a housing waiting list. I've got a woman two half mile away from me at the moment who's emailed me. She had a court injunction, a Section 21 eviction. She has nowhere to live. She's got health issues, and they won't look after her until she gets evicted. And then she could be moved anywhere in the country. And that is the reality we're living in today. And that's what we're trying to do in MK, is we can have the debates about the long-term solution. But for me, the fuel poverty action we need to be doing now is every single day today is sorting with people who've got nothing and trying to find ways of protecting them and looking after them, as well as fighting to make sure that all the energy we do produce is more fairly distributed, so the people who need it can get it without having paying the earth for it. So there we are. Sorry, I've told too much, Jake. Over to you, my friend.
I'll be very brief because I know obviously we need to wrap up. But yeah, I think obviously, thank you for that, Andrew. And I think it's absolutely spot on that any climate justice solutions, any discourse around climate justice needs to be addressing people's immediate material needs, and tackling poverty in this country needs to be at the forefront of any campaign for climate justice. I think there's the Climate Justice Coalition, which London Mine Network are part of. The big slogan for this year and the big campaign that's been launched recently is around Make Them Pay, and it's talking about that the big multinational fossil fuel giants should be taxed more, and that wealth should be going towards funding public services, addressing social inequality, insulating homes. And yeah, we've got mining companies worth tens of billions listed on the London Stock Exchange. That wealth which has been built across centuries of colonial, over a century of colonial exploitation, needs to be redistributed. And I guess, and yeah, that's obviously what Ruth you were talking about. And I think that what you were saying was absolutely spot on around how can solutions that reduce mineral demands be populist solutions, which are also like meeting people's immediate needs. And yeah, those are definitely conversations we need to have more of. I think ideally within every trade union, yeah, we need to get to a stage of having a motion around supply chain justice, which is relevant. And that's something we're happy to work with people in any union on. I just want to finally just mention that we are currently in the process of finalising a workshop around energy injustices and critical minerals, which we're hoping to bring to as many communities across the UK as possible. So yeah, we're really keen to connect with people who, if you're part of a local group or connected to people and you're interested in co-organising a workshop with us to explore these questions in more detail. I said to Amal that I'd send details about that, which hopefully can be followed on. And yeah, I've put my email in the chat. But yeah, really grateful to hear from all that expertise from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jake. Thank you to all of our speakers, everyone who's come in, everyone who's contributed in the chat. Really brilliant and thought-provoking conversation. For Andrew, maybe for your benefit as well, I'm just going to say, that at Fuel Poverty Action, we are campaigning for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to cover their needs, like adequate heating, lighting, and cooking, through our Energy for All campaign. And you'll be hearing from me on maybe how you can support that, and maybe pass some of that information down to the people that you are also, the many people clearly that you are supporting. Without further ado, I'm going to close the session. The next Fuel for Thought is going to be in September. So we're having a little month's break. I'm going to wish everyone a happy summer. Please give us a wave, say good evening, unmute yourselves, and see you soon. Thanks again, Jake, Andrew, Deanna. See you soon.
Thank you.